income on their tax return. So it's important that you report these to the recipient in the year that you pay that to them. So this is just a list, and we'll go through all of these a little bit later when we get through. I'm gonna have the same list if you flip over multiple pages in your training manual that shows these boxes all filled in, so that you know exactly when you run across a payment, exactly how you need to report that and which 1099 return to use. Used to be a little easier. Used to be you all use the 1099-Gs for cost share payments that were agricultural related. And then you had the 1099 miscellaneous that you used for other types of payments. And now the IRS, beginning last year in 2020, they developed a new form called the 1099 NEC. And in the process, they revised the 1099 miscellaneous form. So now you've got 3 forms to worry about. And so it takes a little bit of effort to kind of figure out which form do you use and what box do you report it in, and how do you gather that information out of QuickBooks to get that information together. So this is just a quick list. I'm sure that I've forgotten a few things, and if there's different ones that you're not sure about and you make that payment and you're wondering about that, just let me know and I'll be glad to get back to you on those. Okay, let's talk about the 1099 miscellaneous first. So the 1099 miscellaneous basically is the reporting form that would be used for any payments that don't fall under the 1099-G or don't fall under the 1099 NEC. So it's kind of as it states, it's a miscellaneous. The ones that you would typically use are going to be in rents. And we're going to talk about, again, this list later. So, but as we go through this, I'll go through the different types of boxes that you're going to use and what types of things. So rents, you're going to pick up any rent that you pay to a landlord for building, or if you rent equipment, whether it's a computer or whether it's a drill or whether it's a no-till drill or a sprayer, or you rent a tractor, whatever it takes, maybe a vehicle, those rents would go here. And then box 3, the other income, is going to be a multitude of other things that you all have. So ACB payments, CCB payments, nutrient management payments, any kind of, trying to think, I'll go through some of those later again, but that's where this other income box comes into play. Typically, you would not have anything in this box 10 as gross proceeds paid to an attorney unless you had some kind of a lawsuit and a settlement and you end up having to pay some of those proceeds over to an attorney. Attorney fees now are split between the 1099 NEC and the 1099 miscellaneous. But most of the time you would not use the 10, you would box 10, you would use it on the 1099 NEC for typical payments you would pay to an attorney. The federal tax withheld and state tax withheld, you probably will not have to worry about, but if you do, we'll go through some of the reasons that you do have to later on, but those could be potential boxes that you would use. We're going to also talk about payees that you, the payor is you, and then the payees, how you come up with their ID number that you use, why it's important to have specific names, all of that. And then we're going to talk about too the void and corrected box as we get through this. But just want to kind of generally tell you what is reported on the 1099 miscellaneous. So the 1099 miscellaneous, typically you're going to only fill out the copy A, which is the copy that goes to the IRS. And you're going to fill out the copy B, which is the copy that goes to the recipient. Now, if you order 1099s, you're typically going to get the other copies as well, a state copy. And and potentially another other copy. Those do not have to be used. The state copy would only be used if you have state tax withheld. So you don't have to use that any other time. So typically you all are only going to have to worry about the two forms, the red form and the recipient form. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to go about getting forms and filing those here later. And then let's move on over to the 1099 NEC. The NEC, just in general, is for reporting of any non-employee compensation. So that's typically going to be payments to a person, or it could be to a partnership. Typically, you don't send 1099s to anybody that's a corporation. One misnomer, though, with a corporation is, even though they're exempt, LLCs, which is considered a limited liability company, or you might hear them called limited liability corporations, the LLCs themselves are not typically a corporation. They can elect to be a corporation, and we'll get to the W-9 here in a little bit. But if they elect to be a corporation, then you would not have to send them one. But typically an LLC by default is a partnership. And so you do have to send 1099s to individuals, partnerships, estates, and trusts.
Sarah, can I jump in for a second? This is Shannon.
You may.
Elizabeth Dillinger had a question that I think you just answered. I just want to make sure before we go forward that was answered. Elizabeth, if you could just let me know if that was answered for you. She was asking that she was told that they did not have to send if a vendor was an LLC or incorporated.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that was,
yes.
Yep, and you addressed that. So perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. So corporations are exempt, LLCs are not. Okay. And like I said, sometimes LLCs will elect to be a corporation, and they would be at that time. But I'll show you on the W-9 when we get to that point. Typically with an NEC, you only report payments if you've made payments of over $599. Now that's, some people will think that that's over $600, but it's really $600 or more. So it's over $599. So if you pay someone $600, you need to send them a 1099. And an NEC can be an attorney. It can be an accountant, an architect, a contractor, an engineer, any kind of professional services that are performed by any of those people. They can be for someone who has done repair work for you, whether it's on a computer or on a vehicle or on a no-till drill, whatever. If they've done repair work and there's labor involved and the amount is for more than $600, then you might have to send them a 1099 NEC. One thing that kind of throws that, because they've split the NEC and the 1099 miscellaneous, and I may have a point somewhere on a different slide, but if you have, for instance, someone that you've hired someone to do some backhoe work, and you're actually paying for the rental of the backhoe and the labor for that backhoe driver, then you would have to split it, and you can allocate those payments. So if you paid someone $1,200, you might do $600 as a rental, which would be on the 1099 miscellaneous in the box 1, or you would, and you would do the $600 for the person that's driving that as a 1099 NEC. So you do have to think about some of these things. And then you might have taxable fringe benefits for non-employees. If you've got some contractors that you maybe pay mileage, or you may pay different things for them, those may have to be reported on 1099 NEC. I don't think anybody's paying director fees. If you're reimbursing for mileage, you don't necessarily have to report that. But if you're paying someone a director fee to act on your board of directors, then you do have to send them a 1099 NEC if it's over $599. Again, you've got a red copy. This is what the NEC looks like. So box 1 is where you're going to report the payments. And then again, if you're required to withhold tax, then it would be in box 4 and 5, and we'll cover the reasons that you might be required to withhold tax. So you've got the red copy that goes to the IRS. And again, you've got copy B, that's the recipient copy that goes to the recipient. Any questions on the 1099 miscellaneous or the 1099 NEC in terms of what I've just covered? And there's quite a bit more that we'll go over, but just look in the chat box here. If you do send the miscellaneous to a corporation, what happens? Absolutely nothing. If you send to the corporation, and a lot of, I used to work for Sprint United Telephone, and our policy was to send a 1099 to anybody over $600. It was just easier to run those reports, send it out, and it's done, even for purchases of materials and things like that. So there's no reason not to send them to a corporation. So that's not something that you need to worry about. You do have to make sure you've got the appropriate information to report on the form, but as far as sending it, it doesn't make any difference. Typically, the reason they don't ask you to send one to a corporation is corporations in many times are audited by the IRS, sometimes every year. And they also have good internal controls. They're typically, controlled a little differently. And so they're reporting that income without you having to send them a 1099. The ones that they're more worried about are, the mom and pop shops, the small LLCs that may or may not have all the internal controls or may or may not understand their reporting requirements. The IRS knows if they get a 1099, that alerts them that that is something that they need to report on their tax return. So that's what happens. Then I've got a question. What if the invoice from the contractor is a lump sum of labor and equipment and not broken out? Would the lump sum be reported on the NEC? Yes, report those on the NEC. And they would typically, if you report payments that's material related, it won't make any difference for an LLC or a sole proprietorship. They're going to show that income as income, regardless of whether it's for labor or materials. And then they're going to take the deductions for the material costs that they purchase. So it really won't make any difference on their tax return, whether it's reported on an NEC or not. And the reason the IRS broke out the NEC from the 1099 miscellaneous, because 3 years ago it was all reported on the same form, but the due date to the recipient was January 31st, so they got their forms January 31st, but the IRS didn't have to get their forms until March 31st. Why? I don't know. It's really, to me, it's easier to go ahead and just prepare them and send them to the IRS and the recipient at the same time, but they did allow those to be filed on March 31st. And that was a problem when people started filing their tax returns, because the IRS wouldn't have any income that might have been non-employee compensation on record yet. So they weren't able to they do a matching. They actually file all those returns and they go into a database. It's on the database in the Social Security number of the recipient. The minute that recipient files their tax return, it goes out and matches that up. And if there's not a match, then it spits out a notice and they won't get their refund. So there was a big delay because those 1099s weren't getting onto the database until sometime after March 31st. So people that were filing their returns in February weren't able to get their refunds. They had to basically hold those refunds until they got those. So now the 1099 NECs are due much earlier than the 1099 miscellaneous, and that helps. And we'll go through the due dates here in a little bit too. And then another question, what form do I need to send to a food vendor that we paid for a farmer's cookout? That is going to be on the 1099 NEC, Sarah. That is for catering, and it would go on the 1099 NEC because you're paying a person. And even though that you're paying for the food cost as well, you're basically paying for the person's labor and their business to provide that. And then, of course, you all are familiar with the 1099-Gs. You've been working with those for a long time. The 1099-Gs, The way the IRS instructions indicate is that any taxable grants over 600 or of 600 or more would be reported in box 6. Now, in the past, I don't think you guys have been using the 1099-G box 6. So we're going to ignore that for right now. And that's something that we're probably going to take a look at that and see if there's anything that specifically you all need to be reporting there. But right now, there's nothing that you're doing that's reported on box 6. And then you're reporting box 7 agricultural cost share payments there. And that's how the tracking program is programmed, is to drop all the dollar amounts into box 7 on the 1099-G. Now, my experience has been that the 1099-G out of the tracking program has been typically very accurate. Although if it were me, and this is what I do for Clinch Valley Soil and Water, and I've done for other clients, I'll show you a report to run out of QuickBooks so that you can verify that what's in tracking and what's in QuickBooks equal. And if there's a difference, then you need to investigate and figure out if there's maybe something that's misposted in the tracking program, maybe even a name is not right. And that's a big issue. Is if the names in the Social Security numbers or names and federal ID numbers are not in tracking program correctly, then you're going to create a 1099-G that's incorrect and could create problems for that person when they file their tax return. So the 1099-G, again, we're going to use box 7. And again, you're going to have the red copy that goes to the IRS and the B copy for the recipient. Again, those should be the only two that you'll have to worry about unless you're having to file it with federal tax or state tax withheld. Okay, questions. What if we purchased rain barrels? If you purchase rain barrels, that is a product. So you do not have to report purchases of products on a 1099 NEC or a 1099 miscellaneous. Purchases of a computer, office supplies, any kind of products that's not related to any labor, then you do not have to report those. Okay, does that answer that question? That was from Sharon. All right, I'm just going to go through some general information about 1099s that you can kind of keep in your back pocket. So again, you're going to have to file the copy A with the IRS and the copy B with the recipient, and the other copies are not required. So if you order copies, you can just toss those in the trash and not have to worry about those. I recommend e-filing your 1099s. I've dropped in here 3 different e-file services that are online. I use the efilemyforms.com. Now, I think all 3 of them, and I don't remember if I looked at all 3 of them, but I think all 3 of them do the 1099-Gs as well. Of course, if you're doing them through tracking and you print them out of tracking, you're going to be doing those as a paper copy. So you would print them out of tracking and hopefully all the boxes will line up. And I know that's been an issue in the past, trying to get all the boxes to line up exactly. But if you do the 1099-Gs out of tracking, you would do those as a paper copy. Alternatively, you could rekey that information into an e-file form system and file them there. The advantages to doing it as an e-file, of course, there's a fee. The fees run anywhere from, and it depends on which service you're using, and sometimes if they're running a special. But the advantages to these is once you get that information in, once you put like your district's information in as far as your district address, federal ID number, that flows through to all the 1099. So you don't have to retype that. And then once you get your recipient information in, that stays there. So if you pull it up next year, you've got that information in there for next year as well. You just pull that information and it drops it straight to the form. So there's less retyping and rekeying than you would if you were typing everything up or you were putting it in Excel or something like that. And then the service will actually mail the form to the recipient based on the address that you type in. and they will e-file the form directly to the IRS. So you don't have to worry about, stuffing envelopes, buying forms. You don't have to worry about all that. All that's done by the service. And again, they're usually like $2.99 to $3.99 per form or per recipient. They pay for the postage. If you put somebody's email in there, sometimes they'll go ahead and email them their copy as well, so they can get it quicker. Of course, the downside is some cost. And the downside sometimes can be too, is that if you do the forms on January 29th, the recipient might not get it for a week or a week and a half, depending on where they're mailed from. I know when I do mine from e-file my forms, I think it's done out of somewhere on the West Coast. So I've noticed that recipients don't get theirs for about 7 days on this end of the country. But that's not a problem. As long as they're mailed and processed on the 31st, you've met your obligation, and those are mailed out, and it doesn't make any difference really, other than the fact that somebody may be trying to file their tax return quickly. But most farmers are not in a huge hurry to get their tax return done unless they need to worry about their quarterly tax payments. So that's e-filing forms. And then we've got, I've put in here where I order my actual paper copy forms, which I've not done the last couple of years, but this is where I've ordered the last couple. And I think you can just go to tinins.com, but I think this whole thing here may take you directly to the 1099s. But if you order 1099s, then you need to make sure that you order matching envelopes. And you'll need to order, probably you can look at your QuickBooks file to see and go ahead and try to research it beforehand. But, you may have to order 1099Gs, 1099 miscellaneous, and 1099 NECs, depending on, and then, you may have one 1099 miscellaneous, but you're going to have to buy 25 of the forms because that's the minimum. So you've got that to deal with if you do decide to do paper copy. And then you can also order forms for free at the IRS if you go to this website. So you can order the 1099s. They come in, they're bound on the left. So if you're going to print them on a printer, you would have to burst those apart and then put them in your printer one at a time typically. The 1099 for the recipient is a fairly thin copy. So sometimes it doesn't feed to the printer very well. So there are issues sometimes with using the free forms. If you're typing them up, you can leave them together and they all, it's got the carbon copy so you can print them all at the same time, but nobody wants to type. I don't know anybody that's got a typewriter anymore, except for maybe I can remember one district was doing theirs on a typewriter last year. So, there's some downsides to doing that. And if you do order the free forms, you still do have to order the envelopes. The IRS pretty much requires you to send these in the windowed envelopes. So keep that in mind. You cannot pull up on the IRS website the 1099 forms and fill them out there. The red forms are actually a scannable copy. And the red copy on the IRS website is not scannable. So you can't use the red copy. You can, however, use the black recipient copy, but to me, that's not a very efficient means of doing 1099s because you really need to do them both at the same time. So I don't see any real advantage to doing that. But this is the instructions here from the IRS. It says the official red copy cannot be used from their website or any other PDF website. So be careful about doing that. All right, let me real quick look at my questions. So it said I was told that I could fill out the tax forms in black ink, printing in a pinch for a correction. Is that correct? You can handwrite. You do not have to type them. You can handwrite them. Just make sure that they're legible, that every number is very, very specifically done. The red copy is scannable if you do it in black ink and you're very careful about doing that. just make sure that you know, if you're going to order forms from either the IRS website or another service, just use those. So yes, Sherry, you can do that. I think that was your question. Are the free forms from the IRS laser printed forms? They can be laser printed. Elizabeth, you can throw them in the printer and they're fine. Like I said, though, the recipient copy is kind of a thin piece of paper, so it does make it a little bit difficult, but I do it. I've got an Excel template that I use to print forms when I need to. Can we charge the cost of the 1099 service to cost share program as we would with bank fees? You know, I don't think that you probably could do that. And I really didn't think that you could bank fees, but maybe you can. I'm guessing you could probably maybe use your TA funds possibly. Is that what you're thinking, Sharon, is the TA funds? But specific cost share, I'm not sure you could use it for that. And do you receive a confirmation that they were filed electronically? I do e-file some through Intuit in my QuickBooks. You do receive a confirmation, Sheila, from the e-file service that they've been e-filed. So that's good. And we do have a typewriter with a big old smiley face. And please review VCAP payments. I will be doing that, Kathleen. We have the option to charge things like fees to cost sharing and tracking. Okay. All right. That was Sharon. So I'm not sure though, Sharon, about the 1099 service cost on that.
Sorry,
So-
this is Blair.
Okay.
So 1099s, you're not just sending 1099s for VAX participants, you're also sending 1099s for VCAP or 1099s for DEQ payments and things like that. So pulling 1099 fees from cost share or TA would be, I think from cost share, the definite no. From TA, I think you could prorate it from TA, but you have to be careful with that because it's not all related to the VAX technical program. So that's where you get into that really gray area. A lot of this cost really probably needs to come from your operating funds or your local funds. Again, you could probably prorate some of that expense out of your technical assistance, but it would need to be prorated in a way that we can say that it's lines up with the number of 1099s you print from the VAX program. So that's where you get into that really gray area where it gets really tricky. So it's honestly just safer and better to use your operations or local funds of some kind.
Okay. Yeah. And if you use a service, it's an online service, you're charged per form. And so you'll know exactly how many 1099-Gs that you've filed through them. And you can use that specific charge if you wanted to charge it against your TA. But then anything else, it's a 1099 miscellaneous or 1099 NEC is not going to be TA. Okay, so let's just go through a couple things here as far as reportable payments and non-reportable payments. And this is somewhat general, but I've marked through some things that I know it would not be applicable to you all. So compensation for personal, these are all things that are reportable unless the vendor is incorporated or in some way tax exempt. So compensation for personal or professional services, including parts and materials used for performing those services. Any rental fees, equipment, building, lodging, banquet rooms, booth spaces. If you rent something from the fair for the booth or whatever, typically you're not going to have $600 on those, but just keep in mind that those would be, and if let's just use this for example, if you had, you rented a space for your banquet from the Fair Association. They had a nice building and you rented it for $200. And then later in the year, you rented it again for another event for $200. And then again, when the fair came around, you rented a booth space for $200. If you paid the fair or whoever owned that $600, then you're going to report that. Doesn't matter if you just did it 200, 200, 200. Any catering that you have done would be reportable if it's over $600. Registration for conferences, trainings, workshops, Most of those are going to be corporations, but you'd be surprised at how many are actually LLCs. So make sure that you do keep that in the back of your head. Membership dues as well. Probably not going to have more than $600 for membership dues, but if you've got a whole slew of people that are on the board and employees that are members of a particular organization, you might pay more than $600. Any honorarium fees, speaker fees, entertainment, transportation can be. Now, typically, if you fly an airline, they're going to be a corporation, but you might find yourself in a position where you might, rent a bus to go somewhere, if you were going to do something big. Any merchandise that is custom made or contains your logo. Typically, merchandise is not reportable, but in this instance, if it's custom made, then you do report it because there is some labor involved in whether it's stitching your logo on a hat or a shirt or a jacket. If it's over $600, then that's required to be reported on a 1099. Advertising where the ads are created by the vendor. So if it's basically custom made, you tell the vendor what you want and they do it for you and do all the imaging and all that. They're doing a lot of different labor involved in that. So that would be reportable if it's over $600. Gross proceeds paid to an attorney or law firm. And in this case, that's whether they're incorporated or not. I'm not really sure why that's the case, but incorporated attorneys are not exempt. So even if you pay more than $600 to an attorney for whatever, you've purchased a building and you've gone through the closing process and you're paying them for some fees, or you're doing some easements or whatever, and you've got to get an attorney involved. If it's over $600, you have to report that to them. And then payments to a deceased employee. I'm not going to go through that, but I just want to let you know, if you have a deceased employee that you're paying, and they typically would get a W-2, there are certain payments after death that are reported on a 1099 rather than on a W-2. Payments that are not reportable are any expense reimbursements that are substantiated by original receipts. So if you're having someone that's, they're constantly getting reimbursed for supplies, as long as they're turning in their receipts and you're doing a reimbursement, you do not have to report those. Any utilities, don't have to worry about that. Any merchandise that you purchase, as long as it's not customized, are not reportable, as long as there's no specific service or labor involved in that. Freight is not reportable. Subscriptions are not reportable. Rental of storage units are not reportable. Now, if you send one to somebody that has storage units that you rent from, that's no problem, but you're not required to. Food and meals that are not catered, you do not have to report. So if you're just out eating somewhere, you don't have to worry about that. Classified ads in a newspaper or promotional ads that you create and just turn into the advertiser to run for you are not reportable. Scholarships are not. Software, the purchase of software is not reportable, but if you pay someone a maintenance agreement to maintain your software every month or to maintain your hardware every month, then those are reportable. Payments to a school, college, university, church, or anybody that's recognized as a tax exempt entity, you do not have to report those on a 1099. And then again, payments to a corporation, noting that the LLC is not normally a corporation, other than to an attorney. All right, questions. And we've got Sherry, even if the organization is nonprofit. So that's where this one comes into play right here. The school, university, church, or other tax exempt entity, you do not have to report those payments to them. If you rent space from the county, do we send them a 1099? No, that would be considered a tax exempt organization. And we have a scholarship award we give to high school students every year, and we always send the 1099. Is that incorrect? I'm not sure if you would report those 1099s on a, typically you do not have to do a scholarship. Now, school does report scholarships on a 1099-T, but you are typically not required to send a 1099 to a scholarship recipient. They are responsible for taking care of that themselves, but you're not required to send them a 1099. And so should I be sending a 1099 to the company that provides my IT service? Yes, if they are not a corporation, you would be, and you paid them more than $599. Any other questions on this particular piece before we move on? And just for your all's information, when you look at my slides, if it's color coded, like this is G, general information, and it's a light green on the headers, these two pages go together. And now we'll be moving on to special circumstances. So we talked a little bit about this. If you have reimbursements to a contractor and they adequately account, in other words, they turn in receipts to you, then you typically do not have to send them a 1099 for that. However, if you have a contractor that works for you, and I know some of you all are using some contractors for some like part-time help, and I'll go through that a little bit here in a bit too, whether or not that's appropriate or not. But if you are doing that and you do not ask them to adequately account for those expenses, say you reimburse them, for a meal, but they don't turn in, or you give them a meal allowance, or you give them a tool allowance, or you let them use your company vehicle. Those are instances where the contractor is not adequately accounting to you, then they should be, all that information should be reported on 1099. And again, we talked about this a little bit ago about a bulldozer and splitting those expenses between rent and his particular labor cost would be on the NEC. You do not have to file 1099s in Virginia if you have not withheld any tax from those payments. So don't worry about sending anything into Virginia. Typically, you're not going to have any kind of requirement there because you won't be withholding any Virginia tax. And I have verified that with the Virginia Department of Taxation. So, all right, any questions on that? And we'll go on to another topic. Great. Thank you all for asking questions. I do like to answer questions, so thank you. All right, 1099 corrections. If by chance you have to correct a 1099, all you have to do is refill out the 1099 that you originally did, just refill it out. Might be a dollar amount that's changed, or it could be a TIN that needs to be changed, whatever it is, and just mark that it's corrected. Now the 1099-G, that's all they have is a corrected box. But if you move over to the 1099 miscellaneous and the 1099 NEC, you're going to see a void box as well. Do not check the void box. Do not send in voided 1099s. The only time that I've used void is if 1099s come in typically on 2 per page. And if I only need to use one of those, then the second one that's blank, you need to mark void. So if you're using a paper copy and you've got 2 per page and let's say you've run 5 1099s. Well, on that last page, you're going to have 1 blank 1099. Mark it as void. That way, when the IRS scanning equipment goes through, it knows to ignore that 1099. But otherwise, don't use that void box. So if you're doing a corrected 1099, again, just fill out all the information that you normally would fill out with the corrected information and mark it as corrected. Does that make sense? That's pretty simple. Now, if you do a corrected 1099, I've failed to actually pull up the 1096, but let's quickly talk about the 1096. So if you are processing 12 1099 miscellaneouses and 30 1099-Gs, and 1 1099 NEC. The 1096 is like a cover transmittal sheet that you use. Let me just pull it up real quick so I can see if I can do it. I'm gonna drag this over here. I can. I'm on a computer that I'm not used to, so trying to figure out how to drag and drop here. Okay. So I'm just going to pull up the 1096. I don't know why I didn't think to do this, but I didn't. So the 1096, let's see here. This is a PDF. So the 1099, hopefully everybody can see this, but this is the 1099-6 or the 1096. And this is a cover sheet transmittal that goes with your paper copy. Now, if you e-file your 1099s, it does not create a 1099-6. So if you go and try to e-file your forms and you're trying to find your 1096 to actually print, there's not one. The way the e-file service works is they send them in batches, and I think it's all electronic. So it doesn't even look like this. They're just sending some kind of an electronic thing to alert the IRS. But if you're sending in, say, 10 1099 miscellaneous, 1 1099 NEC, and 20 1099-Gs, I would do a different 1096 for each one of those. So you would fill out all this information, tell it how many forms you've got. So if it's 20 1099-Gs, put 20 there, and then go down here and do a check mark on the 1099-G here. And send that in with your 1099-Gs. Okay. Now, the reason I kind of brought this up, and I think most of you all have been doing this, but I just wanted to make sure. So if you've got 1099 miscellaneous and you've got 10 of those, you put 10 here, and you go down here and you mark 1099 miscellaneous, wherever that is, right here in box 95. Can you all see my cursor? Hopefully you can. Then the reason I brought this up is that if you're doing a corrected 1099, you also need to send in the 1096 for those as well. So you'll just go in here and you'll put in exactly how many forms. So if you're just sending in one corrected form, you put in 1, and then you mark 1099 miscellaneous, whichever one you're doing. Okay. And that goes in with your 1099 corrected form. Okay. So just be sure that this 1096 goes with your 1099 forms. Okay. Question. Sherry says, I've always mailed 1099 miscellaneous and 1096 separate from the NEC and 1096. Can I put them together or keep sending them separate? Sherry, I think you should be able to put them together. However, to avoid problems with the IRS, I would continue to mail them separately. It's just, and I'll just let you all know, the IRS since COVID has been in an uproar. They are way behind in processing things. I don't know how it's going to go in January when everybody starts doing the 1099s. Obviously, e-filing is better because it goes straight to their system. In December of last year, and they're not a whole lot better, but in December of last year, they had over 10 million pieces of unopened mail sitting in freight trailers outside their gates that they had not even looked at. I haven't heard from the AICPA lately how far behind they are, but they are still behind. They still have not processed 2019 paper copy tax returns, and they're way behind on 2020 paper copy tax returns. So anything that you can e-file is going to get to them like instantly. Anything that you mail may or may not get opened for months. So if you can, I know this is a change for a lot of people. E-filing is definitely different, but once you get used to it, I think you will really like it. So now's the time to maybe take a look at those e-file services and see if that's something that you want to consider. Because again, the IRS is really behind on opening paper copy, and they're not They're not promising things are getting done first in, first out, or last in, first out. They're just kind of getting to things as they can get to things. So it's really, it's important to keep that in the back of your head, because if you're mailing those to the IRS, you know, your date stamp is fine. They won't be late, but they might not get on the IRS's website in time for one of your recipients to file their tax return and for it to go match that up and for them to release their refund so that they can get their refund. So just by the fact that you've mailed them in might hold up somebody's tax refund if those are not open timely. Renee, can we set up our e-file system ahead of time and enter data to get a jump? Yes, you can do that. Actually, the service that I've used, I got an email, I don't know, 3 weeks ago that said they were offering a discount now if you wanted to go ahead and e-file your returns now, which you can do. If you don't think you'll have any more payments between now and the end of the year, and you know that you can go ahead and get those processed, you can do that. So you can go ahead and get those set up. And it doesn't cost anything to use the service and to get information in. They don't charge you anything until you hit that button and say submit. And then they'll ask for credit card information. So you can get all that information in without getting charged for anything. Okay. Terry says she's always mailed hers together. So like I said, it's okay. It should be okay to mail them together. It's just that the IRS has, it's a very confusing time for them. They're very short staffed. I think they're trying to hire like 20,000 people. So if you're looking for a job. Okay. So let's talk a minute about penalties for not filing 1099s. In the last couple of years, the penalties have gotten pretty stiff. However, I don't know of anybody that's been assessed a penalty. Now, I can't say that that won't happen, but I have e-filed some 1099s late, even e-filed them late, and haven't gotten any penalty assessment that I'm aware of. So I'm not sure how much they're actually going about this, but just to let you know that the penalties can be pretty stiff. So you are required to file, and we'll go through the due dates here in a little bit, but you are required to file by the deadline. If you're late and you file something 30 days past the deadline, then you're penalized $50 per form. That's $50 for the 1099 recipient form and $50 for the 1099 IRS form. If you're more than 30 days late, but before August 1st, then you're assessed $110 per form. And that's again, $110 for the recipient form and $110 for the IRS form. So you're talking about $220 per form. So if you've forgotten to do 1099s for 10 different recipients because you thought the 1099Gs were the only thing you needed to send out, and then you've got a whole bunch of 1099 miscellaneouses that you should have sent, then you could get penalized pretty heftily. If you wait until after August 1st, it's $280 per form. So we're looking at $560 per form. I'm not sure why it says 570. That should be 560. And these are the maximum. So you all would never get to the maximum, but just know it's not like $1,200 maximum. It's a big maximum. So if you've forgotten to send 1099s to 10 people and you don't discover that until the end of the year, you're talking about $280 times 2. That's $560 times 10 people. That's a lot of money that the district could have to pay. So just keep that in mind. There is a reduced payment for the reduced maximum for small taxpayers, but that's the maximums that I've put in here. So these maximums are for small taxpayers that I've put there. Okay. All right, questions. Just to clarify, we do run 1099 reports based on a calendar year, not a fiscal year. Yes. 1099s are done on a calendar year, just like W-2s are done on a calendar year. And I've never done e-file, but if I decided to do that, would I still need to mail a paper copy to my recipients? No, typically in your service, if you do an e-file service, they may have the option for a reduced rate to let you mail the copy to your recipient. But if you pay the full rate, typically they will mail the copy, they will e-file the copy to the IRS, and they will mail the copy to the recipient. And if you've put the recipient's email address in there, they will email a copy to the recipient. So they take care of all that for you. So you've saved yourself postage, time, purchasing envelopes, purchasing forms, all that. So that's a big benefit, I think. All right, let's talk about W-9s. I'm not sure why this is cut off. I apologize. So along with 1099s, many times you all don't know or don't have the information you need to file the 1099. I think with cost share payments, you all are pretty good about gathering a W-9 from people before you mail out a cost share payment to them. It's really a good policy for anybody that you make a payment to ask them to send you a W-9. A W-9 basically is just a form, and I'll show it to you here in a second, just a form that allows you to gather the information that you're going to need in order to file them a correct 1099. So if you do send them a W-9, and I would recommend, and if you work with the state at all, if you're like, for me, for instance, if when I do these training sessions, the very first thing they ask me to do is send them a W-9. They won't pay me until I send them a W-9. Of course, I'm incorporated, so they don't have to send me a 1099, but they want to make sure that they know that I'm incorporated. And so they require that I send them a W-9 before they send me a payment. And that's something that you all should consider doing. It's just good policy. So if you are making payments to someone, ask them to fill out a W-9 before you send them a check. That way you have it on file. And they're obligated to fill that W-9 out correctly. Although I have to say, some people don't understand the directions and don't always fill it out correctly. So the W-9, I'm just going to go down here and look so you can see. So this is the W-9. So basically, they're asking for a name, a business name, if it's different, and they want you to certify what type of entity you are. So if you send this, for instance, to me, because you've paid me more than $600, then I would certify that I'm an S corporation. If I'm an S corporation or if I'm a C corporation, that automatically alerts you that you do not have to send me a 1099. Now, here's the limited liability company. If they check that, then they also have to put in this box whether they have elected to be a C corporation, an S corporation, or a partnership. If they put a C corporation or S corporation here, then you do not have to send them a 1099. Even though they're LLC, if they've elected to be a C or a S, you do not have to send them a 1099. If they're a partnership, which is what most LLCs default to, then you would have to. There are also single member LLCs. So that's basically a sole proprietorship that has elected to be an LLC, basically for limited liability purposes. Those single member LLCs are not a corporation, so you do send them a 1099. But this form allows you to gather all this information, and based on all this information here, that's what you use to fill out your 1099. Now, when you get these from, hopefully for cost share purposes, if you get these, you need to make sure that whatever is going into the tracking program, as far as their name or their business name, all this information, that all that's correct. Because if the tracking program spits out a 1099-G that does not have the correct name, social security, or employer ID number, then it can cause problems with the recipient. And I'm gonna go through what is the correct information to put in those. Let me go back up here. Okay, so the entity should be the entity that is like with the, let me find the information I was going to refer to here. Okay, so this tells you what you need to do to fill it out. So if that person that you sent a W-9 to is an individual, they should be entering their name as it appears on their 1040. And it should be based on the way it's on their social security card. Hopefully they're doing that. If they don't, it can kick out when they do their tax return. So when they enter that information, hopefully you'll have that exactly. So typically it's a name, a first name, a middle initial, and a last name. If you don't see that, you might question it and make sure that they're actually putting it in the same way that's on their social security card. If it's an LLC or a sole proprietorship, then they need to be entering their individual name on line 1. Even if it's a single member LLC, they need to put their name as it appears on line 1. And then they can put their doing business name on line 2. But you're going to be using the line 1 information because that's the information that's on the IRS's database. And then if they're a partnership or an LLC that's not a single member LLC, or an S corporation or a C corporation, they need to enter their corporate name or their partnership name on line 1. Okay. And if it's any other entity, typically they're just going to put whatever their information is. And those entities would be like tax exempt entities. They would put their information on line 1 and then check that they're tax exempt. Okay, so if they're a corporation, and this is the check in the box. So if they're a corporation, then they check the box as a corporation. If they're an individual or a sole proprietor or a single member LLC, they need to check that box. If they're an LLC that's taxed as a partnership, they need to check that and indicate, what they are. If they're elected to be an S corporation, C corporation, or partnership. Okay. Hopefully all that makes sense. Hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, it's not your responsibility to explain to someone how to fill this out, okay? This form itself, I think, is 6 pages long. So if you mail them the W-9, you should mail all 6 pages that has detailed information on how to fill it out. But it's not your responsibility to figure out, to explain that to someone. And if they do call and ask you, you probably should say, well, your tax preparer or your CPA probably needs to help you figure that out because you don't know enough about their business to know. Okay. However, if you get something that does not look right based on what we're learning today, I think it is important for you to follow up with that person and say, is your name really such and such? Is that how it shows up on your social security card? If that's their name and that's on their social security card, then they should be filling out their social security number, not an employer ID number. Okay. Go back up here and make sure I didn't forget something here. So they're certifying that this is correct. So when you get this and it's signed and they've certified, it should be something that you can use to fill out the W-9 or the 1099. And it's something that you need to keep in your file for at least 3 years so that if the IRS does ever ask, you have a copy of it. Now, you do not have to send those to the IRS. They do not have to send them to the IRS. It's purely an informational reporting between the recipient and you, but you do need to keep that on file in case the IRS does ask. And if a 1099 is reported incorrectly and there's a mismatch between the name and the ID number, then you'll get a notice. And we're going to talk about that here in a bit. They can send W-9s back to you by fax, email, or some other electronic transmission. You don't have to have the original signed form. You can, as long as it's signed, you can receive it by any means that you can. Also, if you do a search on the internet and you find out that they're a corporation, just make a note that they're a corporation based on the information that you've gotten from the internet. Put that in your file that they're a corporation, and you don't have to send them a W-9. But if there's no indication that they're a corporation and there's, it's just John Deere, unless you scroll to the bottom of the page, sometimes you can't see, is John Deere a corporation or are they LLC? And you'd be surprised how many really big companies are LLCs. And you're required to send them a 1099 of LLC. So don't just assume because they're big that they're a corporation, because that's not the case. And then there's some instances too that it's even difficult to find out, especially if you don't require the W-9 up front, and say you're in December and you're looking over everything, and you say, oh shoot, I've paid this person $400 this month and another $600 the next month, and now we're $10,000 and I didn't get a W-9, and I don't know where to send that information to. Sometimes it's hard to figure out who to send it to, and the person that you do send it to doesn't know. So give yourself some time to make sure that you get those back. Don't wait until January 15th to start looking at those. Okay, so if the recipient provides you with incorrect data, then you're required to withhold and remit tax for future payments. And that's the result of a notice that you'll get from the IRS. They'll say that you need to withhold. So it's important that all this information is correct. All right, real quick, let's see if we've got any questions on this.
Looks like we have 2 questions.
W-9s need to be dated per calendar year. You do not have to request W-9s from the same recipient every year if you have no reason to believe that they've changed their entity. Now, if you've made payments in previous years to John Doe, and then now it's John Doe LLC, then you ought to get another W-9 from them, because if now that they're an LLC, they could have elected to be a C corporation or S corporation. And then somebody said, how does a nonprofit fill out the W-9? Again, you don't have to give them any instructions on that, but typically a nonprofit's just going to fill out their information here. They're going to check other and put on here nonprofit, and that alerts you that you don't have to do anything. Since I thought DCR required a new W-9 each year for cost share sign up. That can be an internal requirement, but as far as the IRS goes, that's not a required requirement. But yes, and I think it's probably a good practice that you do get a W-9. Those are large payments, so it's probably a good practice. And again, if you suspect somebody has changed entities, it's really a good idea to go ahead and ask for a W-9. And there's no reason why you can't. I mean, people can't, they're not supposed to refuse to send you a 1099. Here's the failure to furnish it. It's $50 penalty. So if they don't furnish it, you can contact the IRS and say, I can't get a W-9. What do I do? And they can send them a penalty for $50 to not furnish it. If they provide false information, and let's say that they check that they're exempt for some reason, or they're a corporation and they're not, that can be a $500 penalty. Okay. All right, we talked a little bit about the correct name and TIN to use on a 1099. It's real important that that's done, because those 1099s, the minute they go in, they get bumped up against a database that the IRS has. And that database is going to look to see if that TIN and that name match on their database. So if it's someone that has put in a wrong social security number and they've got their name and the social security don't match, it's going to kick that out. If, even if it's someone, you've got two John Does and one's John R. Doe and one's John D. Doe, it may kick it out if it's not specific enough. So you just have to make sure that when you fill out the 1099 that you're filling it out with the correct name and taxpayer ID number. TIN, I think I've got this somewhere. A TIN may be a social security number, or it may be referenced in some literature as an EIN if it's a federal ID number. So typically a social security number is going to be 3 digits, 2 digits, 4 digits, separated by a dash. And you need to make sure you put those dashes in. If it's a federal ID number, it's typically going to be 2 digits, dash, and then 7 digits. So you need to make sure that you've got those specifically in there with those dashes in there. If you're a single member LLC, that's a disregarded entity separate from its owner, then they would want to enter their social security number or the EIN of the owner if they have one. And typically the owner is not going to have an EIN unless there was previously a sole proprietor and had employees. So if they had employees and did payroll, they would probably, as a sole proprietor, would have had to file for a federal ID number. So on the database, it's going to show both their name and social security number. And on a different database, it'll have their name and their federal ID number. And that would work. That wouldn't kick anything out. But if they don't have an EIN and the LLC itself has filed for an EIN, don't use that LLC EIN. Now I know this is very confusing and I have to go back and refer to my notes all the time for LLCs. But if it's a single member LLC, you should not use the disregarded entity or the LLC's EIN. So if they, for instance, if they were a sole proprietor and they only operated using their social security number, and then they formed an LLC, and under the LLC, they applied for a federal ID number, and they're still a single member LLC, they're going to file that income from that entity on their 1040. So the IRS wants you to use their 1040 name and their 1040 social security number, not the LLC's. Now it's very confusing unless you know how an LLC files their tax return. If the entity is an LLC, as a corporation or a partnership, and again, as a corporation, you don't have to do anything, but if you choose to do a 1099 for them as a corporation, then you would use that entity's EIN. All partnerships and multi-member LLCs should have their own EIN or federal ID number. That's basically what all this says. All right. Again, make sure that your format is correct when you do the 1099. Don't just put number. It needs to have the dashes in there. The recipient's name. Right now, the IRS is kind of split on certain things, but usually they don't like it if you use a period. So if it's a name, a middle initial, and a last name, don't use the period. Just put the middle initial with some space. The same way with addresses. They don't necessarily like the periods and the commas. So just do their address without the periods and the commas with appropriate spacing. I'm not sure why that is, but they've kind of dropped out all the punctuation. So here's some potential problems. So we've got a sole proprietor, Mark M. Linkus, has a fencing business called Mark's Links and has a federal ID number. So he probably employs some people, has payroll, so he has to have a federal ID number. When he goes to fill out his W-9, he should fill out his full name that's on his 1040. And then he can fill out line 2 with Mark's Links. in part one, which is where you put in your federal ID number or social security number, in part one, his TIN should be his social security number or his federal ID number, as his federal ID number should match his name on the database. So he's a sole proprietor. He automatically has a social security number from the day he was born, but he also has filed for a federal ID number and for Mark M. Linkus, even though it's Mark's Links. When he files for that federal ID number, it's Mark M. Linkus. So he has both of those numbers associated with his name. And so when you do the 1099, you need to use his name. Underneath it, if you want to do a DBA, you can put Mark's Links. But keep in mind that you're reporting based on his line one name, and his TIN should be his social security number. But in this case, you can also use his federal ID number. Now, just the opposite. Here's another, scenario using Mark. If Mark above has the same business, but it's called Mark's Links LLC, and he's a single member LLC, meaning that he doesn't have a partner. It's just him. It's a single member LLC, and he's elected to be an LLC or set up an LLC basically for limited liability purposes. And Mark's Links LLC has a federal ID number, then it's handled differently. Mark will file his business on a Schedule C on his Form 1040 with the name Mark's Links LLC, but it's on his 1040. However, when he filed for his federal ID number, his name, Mark M. Linkus, is not associated with the federal ID number because he's filed for the federal ID number under Mark's Links LLC. When he goes to fill out his W-9, he should use Mark M. Linkus. In the same way, when you fill out the 1099, use Mark M. Linkus on line one, and then his company name on line two. However, he should be putting in part one his social security number, not the federal ID number that's associated with Mark's Links LLC. Unless he indicates the LLC is a corporation or a partnership, in which case he should be putting Mark's Links LLC on line one of the W-9 and use his federal ID number. Now, how confusing can that be? Pretty confusing, sorry, but that's just the way it goes. All right. That concludes the W-9. Let me see if there's any other questions. So just for information, early on in VCAP, we had a problem where a couple put both names and only her social security number. We've also had issues where they put an HOA name, but the parent company EIN. The IRS sent us a notice and we had to send out notices to the folks. Yes. So it is important, and it's very hard to know when you get a W-9 back how that, whether or not it's correct or not. You have to rely on it, and you have to file the 1099 based on that information. But if you suspect in any way that it may not be right, and that's why I just wanted to educate you a little bit as far as how it should be. If you suspect it's not correct, then you probably should follow up with them, maybe a phone call or something, particularly if it's someone that you know. But you're right. You can't, their name on their tax return is typically goes by the spouse's name. And so putting both of their names and her social security number would have been a mismatch. It works out that way. In the same way with the HOA and the parent company. You just have to be careful that everything matches specifically. But again, there's not always a way for you to know that. Then should the participant in the tracking match part one or the W-9 if there's a difference in the name? So if it's set up in tracking, the tracking information should specifically match what's on line one and what's filled out in part one. So if the tracking references a farm name and that farm is really basically a sole proprietor of that farmer, it should be they fill out the W-9 with their name, their social security card name, and then maybe the farm underneath. So be careful in tracking. I've seen a lot of tracking ones set up with the farm name because that's how you all reference it. But when it spits out the 1099-G, it's not going to be correct. So make sure that you do enter that, have your people enter that information into the tracking program correctly. And it says specifically for these single member LLCs where it should be filed under their name, but they sign up in a farm name. Exactly. That's what, Elizabeth, that's what I was referring to before you even asked that. Because the farm, I've seen that a lot in tracking, is that the farm name ends up in tracking and it's not there in their specific name and social security number. And it needs to be in the name and social security number. And if you need to put in parentheses in tracking the farm name, or I don't know, I can't remember if there's like a DBA in tracking to reference the farm name, but
You can always add the farm name into the notes section on the general tab of the contract.
okay.
If that helps too.
Okay, great. Thanks, Blair. Okay. So all that information, I think we've gone through. All right. So if you do have a mismatch, the IRS is going to send you a notice. And that notice is going to say, we bumped it up against the IRS database and there's not a match. And if you need to read the notice pretty thoroughly because it can be like a 5 or 6 page notice and it can be very confusing. But for the most part, it will typically say that if the error was an error on your part, for instance, you transposed a number or you indicated it was a federal ID number and it should have been a social security number. If the error was on your part, typically there's no other action that you need to take, but you need to read that notice carefully. So usually it just means that you need to make sure that your records are correct for next year. And they don't kick it out. They usually process it and it's okay. They figure it out. Sometimes they'll ask for you to send in a new 1099 corrected one, but typically there's not any action that you need to take. However, if the error arose because the recipient filled out their W-9 wrong, and they used a wrong name or wrong TIN or something, then usually that means that you have to send the information to the recipient and it might require that you start withholding tax on future payments. Now, I've seen the notices come out different ways. And so again, it's important for you to read the notice carefully on what you need to do. But if you're required to do backup withholding, it'll tell you that you have to do like 20% withholding for all future payments to that recipient. You have to withhold that tax and you have to pay that tax in to the IRS. And that's typically paid in. You know, I actually have not done this in years and years because I've not run into a situation where we've had to do backup withholding. But I think there's a place on your 941 to put in that extra tax as a backup withholding. And I'd have to go back and review that just to make sure. And that's how you pay it in. And then when you fill out the 1099, then you show that payment was paid in. You report to that recipient their gross payment, and then you show how much tax was withheld. And then that ends up working out on their tax return so that it shows how much tax you've paid in for them. Okay. Question, if you enter the farm name and tracking notes only, it will not print out from the tracking on the 1099. Is that correct? Just confused on how to enter it in tracking. Blair, maybe you can address that. I don't think it will print out on the 1099. I think that's just going to be a note.
Yes, it shouldn't print out on the 1099. The 1099 from tracking pulls from specific data points. So it should really only be pulling data from the name and the tax ID number, like the address and stuff you entered in. But if you sometimes if you enter in like a person's name and then you go back and you also have like a farm name entered in there, that can cause some problems sometimes up where you have like the participant information. But if you just enter something in the note section, that would not show up on anything but the note section.
And Sharon, now's a good time. You can print those 1099s from tracking at any time. So go ahead and print those now. and start reviewing them. And we'll go through it in here in a few minutes, but we'll also review how to match that back into against QuickBooks. It's 2:30 and now is a good time for us to take a 5-minute break. So if everybody, you can leave your, connected and everything, just.
Hey, Sarah, before we
Yes.
break real quick, Sharon was asking about single entity LLCs, and we do have a number of single entity LLCs in the tracking program. I'm sorry, I didn't realize the question was in relation to a single entity LLC. And when that happens, you need to work with Jen Edwards in getting that set up so that you can enter like a farm name related with a social security number instead of a TIN and things like that. We do have ways through kind of like the back doors that we can help you enter single entity LLCs in the way they need to be entered for 1099s and tax purposes. So,
Right. Yes. For single member LLCs, just remember that the primary person has to be the name of the person on their social security card. And then line 2 can be the name of the LLC. So just make sure that I don't know if I can't remember if tracking will print like multiple lines other than the address on the 1099G. But if it can, you can put the farm name as the second line. But the first line should be the farmer's actual name, social security card name. All right. Any more questions before we break? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and be back here at 2:37, according to my clock. All right, thank you all. If you see me turn my head, it's because you all show up on my right-hand screen and everything else is on my left-hand screen. So, okay, so let's start back here with this same table that we started out with when we first began. So where do we report payments? And then again, this is a list of all the payments that I could think of that you all might run into. I'm sure it's not all inclusive. And there's some things that you all might think of that I didn't think of. So let's just look at some of the ones. I've tried to sort these in terms of the form name. So 1099Gs are first. We've got, and you all are used to this. So this is not anything new to you all. I don't, unless you've got some new people on that's just recently been hired into a district and you've never done 1099s before, but most of you probably have. But these two are the 1099Gs. So we've got cost share payments that are either OCB or CB-VAX to recipients. So if you've paid someone for some cost share and it's typically you would think it's over $600. In my opinion, in looking at, and I did put this down here at the bottom in note A, if it was over $599 and the recipient's not a corporation. But in reading some information, and I think that's what we've always done in the past, but in reading some information, I'm not sure that the cost share payments on the 1099G shouldn't be reported for any amount. Let's see if I can find that information here. So it talks about here, if we're down here at the 1099G instructions, there's no mention of the $600 threshold for box 7, even though box 6 or 5 mentions it and box 6 mentions it, but in box 7, it does not mention that threshold. So I'm not sure that maybe we shouldn't be reporting 1099 payments for cost share of any amount, whether it's $300 or $200. It's probably not going to happen. Most of your cost share payments are pretty large, but it could. Then you also have ag TMDL payments to recipients that are non-septic type payments that you would also report on the 1099-G. And I think those are all in tracking. So that shouldn't be an issue as far as what comes out of tracking and what you flagged to be a 1099-G. Those are going to be reported in box 7. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, I was just going to confirm that, yes, like even the DEQ practices, both septic and ag will print out of the tracking program in the proper places on the 1099-G or 1099 miscellaneous.
Okay. So you do have tracking set up to do 1099 miscellaneous for septic?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I wasn't aware of that. That's good. All right. So those are going to be in box 7, and typically you have to mail those in by January 31st. Okay. Or e-file them by January 31st. Okay, and then the 1099 miscellaneous, this is just a whole slew of payments that could be reported on a 1099 miscellaneous. So I've got, like I said, I've sorted these by the form type. So your building rent, your equipment rent, those are going to be on box 1 of the 1099 miscellaneous. And what I've got here as far as notes, I've got note A, that's if they're over $599 and the recipient is not a corporation. Okay. VCAP payments to recipients, CCAP, ACB, septic cost share, hardware cost share, local, any kind of local cost share, DEQ grant payments, any other kind of grant payments for horse, urban, all of those are going to be on the 1099 miscellaneous in box 3. That's an other income. Those 1099 miscellaneous ones have to be mailed to the IRS by January 28th or e-filed by March 31st to the IRS. But if you look down here, up here, I've got a D. Can you see my pointer? Hopefully you can. I've got a D, and down here in D, it says all recipients have to be mailed by January 31st. Okay, so the recipient one has to go by January 31st, but you do have a delay of what you have to send to the IRS. Then if you have payments to attorneys or payments for gross proceeds, again, would be like in a settlement, or for fees. So if you pay an attorney $50 to do some kind of a service for you, then you're required to send them a 1099. If it's a settlement, it goes into the 1099 miscellaneous box 10. But if it's just an attorney fee for some services that they've done for you, it goes on the 1099 NEC box 1. And the B says that there's no exemption for corporations. Okay, so it's anything, and I a minute ago I said if it's $50, you have to send it in. Actually, used to it was any amount that you sent to an attorney you paid, but now they have increased that to the $600 threshold. So, but they have not gotten rid of the corporate exemption for that. So that would be, and those have to go by January 31st. Then we've got other payments that would be possible 1099 NECs. So if you've got software maintenance agreements, if you've got hardware maintenance agreements, if you've got contractors that you pay for dam maintenance, if you have repairs to equipment, contractors for impact studies, contractors to dig wells, install septic systems, other installations, any payments for part-time help, and I'm going to hit that here in just a minute, web design, accounting services, any of those payments, if they're over that $599 mark, then they need to go on a 1099 NEC, and they're not a corporation. Okay. Now, as far as payments for part-time help, if you have someone that works for you even part-time, it's possible that the IRS in Virginia and the Department of Labor would say that that person is not a contractor and shouldn't be receiving a 1099 NEC. that they're really an employee, even though you just use them, say, for 15 hours a week for 2 months out of the year. And I don't know what that would be, but there's a factor test that you have to use. The IRS and Virginia both have a factor test to determine if this person is a contractor or an employee. Typically, that factor test says that if you have any supervisory control over that person, you tell them what hours they need to work, you tell them where they need to be, you tell them what you expect them to do, you tell them basically how to do it, you provide the supplies that they need. If you do all that, typically they are an employee. They're a part-time employee, but they're an employee, and you should be withholding tax, including them on your 941s. You know, they're just like an employee. If you have no control over them and you say, you know, we need this dam maintained for the better part of the year, you use your tools, you do it on your time, you do it when you get a chance, and probably they have their own company, they're definitely a contractor. Okay. And you would send them a 1099. So I think there's sometimes some confusion about part-time help. So that's just kind of a little rundown about that. All right. Are there this is really just as a guide to use, you know, stick it in your file. You can use this as a reference. You know, I've paid this person this, you go to it and you say, oh, I'll report that on the 1099 NEC in box 1. And we're good to go. So this is kind of helps you so that you don't have to think through that or research it every time the issue comes up. However, tax laws change. 3 years from now, this table could change. So just keep that in mind that, you know, the tax laws are constantly changing. So just know that right now, this is the way it should be. All right, questions. Well, a couple things to Blair, I think. Could the tracking program be modified in the future to get information correctly? So I'll let you address that, Blair, later on. You all may have to think of a way to maybe modify that to make it a little easier on future admins. If our septic client assigns payment to the contractor, the tracking program only prints on a 1099 miscellaneous, but according to this chart, it should be a 1099 NEC. Contractors to dig wells, install septic systems, etc. Is that correct? Yes, it should be on a 1099 NEC. So in that case, you might not be able to just print it out of the tracking program, or it may be that DCR will consider revising the tracking program, which probably means quite a bit of reprogramming. So I'm not sure if that'll be something that'll happen between now and the end of January. And I thought local cost share was added to the 1099Gs. The only time you report on the 1099G is if it's agricultural related. And so if it is agricultural related, then you could report it on the 1099G.
Yeah, Sue, the local funding you use to pay for cost share practices, you can print those out on the 1099G.
Yeah.
The tracking program should allow you to do that. It shouldn't stop you from that. They should populate. As far as like modifications to the tracking program, yes, we can look into that. I want to get some more information from you guys so we know exactly what we're trying to modify, but it just depends on exactly what we need to modify, but we can certainly like put it in the queue to get added to one of our mini lists of modifications. But sometimes if it's something simple, and I don't know if this would be simple or not, we'd have to get Stu and Jen on this, but if it's something simple, we can usually modify it pretty quickly, or like with the next time we do any kind of updates to the program. Or if it's something a little bit more complicated, it might not come out until the new program year when we do all the modifications for the new program year. But you know, we do even try to roll those out in phases at this point. So it's certainly something that we can add to the queue, and it may not fix it for like this upcoming January, but it would certainly potentially fix it for the future. So we can talk further offline about those necessary modifications.
And also keep in mind, if you print some 1099 miscellaneous out of tracking and you got those ready to send and you want to do a 1096 for that batch, and then you've also got some 1099 miscellaneous that are totally unrelated to tracking, and you're getting that information out of QuickBooks, and you want to send those as a batch, you can do 2 batches with 2 different 1096s on them. So if you want to kind of keep them separate so that you know, well, these came out of tracking and these I did. And so you can keep those separate if you want to. Just be sure and mark the 1099 miscellaneous on both of the 1096s. So that's not a problem. One doesn't supersede the other. Sheila, those are agricultural payments, but from a grant. So you just combine them on the PDF. They don't populate. You have to do it manually. I'm guessing you're talking about maybe through tracking, Sheila, and it may be that if different.
No, because this is what Sue had to do also. So they have been the producers, they're same producers. There's not any new producers, but the same producers are paid from this grant. So I have to manually, so did Sue have to do this because we talked about it. I had to manually add those payments together and change the PDF that comes out of tracking. I have to change the number.
Okay. Well, keep in mind, you can send the same recipient 2 different 1099s. So you don't have to combine them, even if one's a 1099 miscellaneous for one grant and another's a 1099 miscellaneous for another grant. You can send them both, and they were both box 3s. You don't have to combine them. You can do them as separate 1099s.
Yeah, but they're 1099Gs because they're agricultural payments.
Okay. Okay.
So
they're in tracking, but they're in tracking.
No, not the grant payments are not.
Okay.
They're in they're just paid through my operations account because the grant money comes in there as BMP payments.
Okay.
But I can send them 2 separate 1099Gs. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So you can
I have
send
another question. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can print one 1099G out of tracking, and then you can create a separate 1099G from the information that you've got in QuickBooks.
Okay, as long as that 1099G from QuickBooks is over 600, because if it's under 600, you'd have to add those monies to the tracking money. I mean, that's also my
no, you would if the 2 add together are over 600. You should send the 1099s to that person, even if one 1099 is for 400 and another one is for 300. You can still send 2 1099s with the lower amounts on them.
Perfect. Thank you. So I have one more question. So with this grant, and this may be a Blair question, but I'm going to ask anyway. With that grant, we also paid BMP payments to Peanut District. So do I send a 1099, or is that something the Peanut District's going to do, or do we combine? I don't know how to do that.
Typically, the district that actually issues the money to the recipient is the one required to send the 1099. So if you were just passing funds over to Peanut, you wouldn't be required to send them a 1099, but they would be required to.
Yeah, no, I'm sending the funds. So because someone argued with me about that, that's all I'm going to say. But so the district that is sending the BMP payments, actually writing the check, needs to send out the 1099.
Yes.
Okay, so let me ask you this, another scenario. So let's say the payment that I sent is 500, but then they received a payment from Peanut that's 1,000. We don't combine those. I just don't send out a 1099 because it's under 600.
If the check that you wrote was for 500, then you're not required to.
Yeah. Okay,
you don't have to add them across districts.
Okay, awesome. Just wanted to make sure I was doing it right. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, if you'll go ahead and mute back now, Sheila. getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know if a couple of people are not muted, but if you can mute, that would be great, and use the chat box. Not that I don't want to talk to you guys, and maybe we'll open it up here in a little bit and we'll talk, but we'll get some feedback if we're not careful. Yay, Sheila. Okay, so any other questions on where we report payments? Hopefully that was some helpful information. Again, I'm really glad for you all to ask questions, because there are a lot of scenarios that come up that are just unique to you guys. All right. Please look at the question about incorrected reported 1099. So Deanna, if we reported last year items on a 1099 miscellaneous instead of an NEC, should we correct it? I think if you reported it on a 1099 miscellaneous and you reported it on box 3, I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you've not gotten any notices at this point, I would probably just let it slide. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't report it on the 1099 NEC, but as confused as the IRS is right now, I don't know that I would confuse the matter more. That's just my personal opinion. That's not necessarily what one of the IRS agents might say, but I think the least you can confuse the IRS right now, the better off you are. All right, a couple of things in the desktop procedures, and this, I helped revise the desktop procedures years and years ago, and then I think somebody else revised them several years ago, maybe in 2016. But one thing that says in there is this: payments of more than $600 per year requires a 1099. That really should say payments more than $599, because it's 600 or more is the threshold. So that's what I've got down here. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying the desktop procedures need to be revised just for that purpose, but just keep that in mind. And then it also says that B&P payments of 600 or more, which this would be typically correct, would be reported. But again, I'm not sure in reading the IRS guidelines, and I didn't go back, and this could have changed over the years, because these documents get reprinted every year. So sometimes you don't always know exactly what has changed, what's new. But right now, when I'm reading this box 7 agricultural payments, there's no mention of the $600 threshold. So it may be that you need to report 1099-Gs for any amount. So just keep that in mind. I'm not sure if the tracking program is designed to just look at 600 and over, or if it lays down, I'm thinking it may lay down any amount, but I can't remember.
I'll have to look into that. I don't remember what it does either.
Yeah, I'm thinking it was maybe any amount, and that somebody asked me at one point in time, well, I shouldn't have to do that. And I think, well, I said, it's printed, go ahead and send it. But I can't remember. That's been a couple of years back. All right. Now
Sarah,
I've got some comments saying that it only does it for 600 and over.
Okay. If we need to make a change for that, we can do that.
Okay. Again, it doesn't hurt anything. People are actually supposed to report on their tax return any amount, whether they receive a 1099 or not. So if they got a payment of $50, they're supposed to report that on their tax return. It's just that the IRS has made that $600 threshold to try to limit the amount of 1099s that corporations have to send out to recipients. But it shouldn't make any difference if you send the 1099 to someone for $50. It should, like I said, it shouldn't make a difference, because they're supposed to report that anyway. Blair, do you have a question?
We have a comment in the chat box about someone last year sent a 1099 miscellaneous, when really they probably should have sent a 1099 NEC for a contractor last year, and they're wondering if that should be if any of that should be corrected.
Yeah, I addressed that just a second ago, but like I
Sorry.
said, that's okay. Like I said, if you reported it on a 1099 miscellaneous in box 3 instead of on the 1099 NEC, I wouldn't worry about it because the IRS is pretty confused right now anyway, and to do amended ones or corrected ones probably wouldn't help matters with them. And the recipient reports it the same way on their tax return anyway. Again, the only reason that they split those out was because of the deadline issues of getting information onto the IRS database in time to match up to tax returns when people started filing their 1040s. So the way it's treated to the recipient is the same, whether it's on the NEC or the miscellaneous for a farmer, because they're going to show it on their Schedule F typically. I think our guidance last year wasn't quite clear on the 1099, so thank you. Good to know we don't have to resubmit. Okay. All right. So let's look at QuickBooks and kind of go through some things to help you all in terms of gleaning the information that you need out of QuickBooks. I've got QuickBooks up, so hopefully you can see this, and I'm going to click into a vendor center and just show you some of the things that I'm looking at. So when you enter a new vendor, if you'll go ahead and put in their information, the vendor name can be anything. So that's just like a vendor number here. It's down here where it has the company name or the full name. That's important as far as 1099 reporting. And I'll tell you, QuickBooks will create the 1099s for you. You can't, I don't like QuickBooks doing the 1099s for you. So what I'm going to do is a workaround for you so that you're not having to do it in QuickBooks. But if you've been successful in doing it in QuickBooks, that's fine. Continue doing it the way you're doing it. But I just don't like the way QuickBooks does it. And I don't like the way that if you flag someone as a 1099 vendor, then all of a sudden you can't maybe make changes that you want to because it pops up and says, oh, this is a 1099 vendor. And you can't do your 1099Gs out of QuickBooks. So that's off the table completely. So I don't typically recommend using the 1099 function out of QuickBooks, but that again, that's totally up to you. But I'm going to show you a workaround. So with the vendor name, you can do the vendor name up here as anything you want, a number, name. That's not the legal name. So the legal name's down here. So if it's a company name, corporation, S corporation, partnership, or multi-member LLC, I would use this company name. If it's a LLC that's a single member or sole proprietor, put in their first, middle, and last name here. And then when you go to tax settings, this is going to be their vendor ID. So it's going to be their social security number or their federal ID number, depending on based on the information that we've already talked about. Okay. And then you can say that they're eligible for a 1099, and that basically just alerts QuickBooks that, if you want to run 1099 reports, it'll pull that person for a 1099. It also enables you to, if you click on this and say they're eligible for a 1099, QuickBooks, I don't know if anybody is using within the payroll system, if you're using direct deposit in payroll, you can actually do direct deposit vendor payments if this is checked. Okay. But you do have to check that. They don't necessarily want to do payments to a bunch of people unless they're 1099 vendors. So once you do that and you fill out all that information, then all that will show up here. And then we're going to run some reports here in a few minutes that will be helpful. So do all that information there. And also be careful that you set your cost share recipients up as vendors and not customers. I've seen some districts, when you type in for a check, let's just do Jane Doe, and it says it's a quick setup and you have an option to pick what you want. I've seen people, I don't know why, I guess they just think their cost share, but their customers, I guess, is what they're thinking. So they'll select customer, but cost shares are vendors as well. So don't select customer, and that way you can run your reports the way you need to. If you select customer, it excludes those. Okay. So just be, when you add someone new and you do a new, do a new check and you have the option to add someone, I would go ahead and do a setup in vendor and let it take you to this screen and go ahead and fill in as much information as possible. The more information you have in QuickBooks, the less digging through files that you have to do later on. So if you've got it sitting in front of you already, go ahead and put in their name, address, whether or not they are, have an ID number, all that. Go ahead and put that in. And then also, just as an aside, for the account settings, if you pay someone a specific thing, this isn't a 1099 related thing, but let's say you pay utilities and it's to AEP. You can go ahead and tell it that you want to do this to utilities. So wherever that is, I don't think we even have utilities on here, but if you did, or if it was to me, it's Adams and Company, and it was accounting services. That way, every time you do a payment, it's going to default to that, and you don't have to retype that into the account name. That's just a quick aside. Okay. All right, let me flip back to this. All right, so what I'm going to do is show you how to run some reports that will be helpful for you if you're doing 1099s out of, this would be basically if you want to do, say, 1099s e-file, or you wanted to do 1099s and drop them, type in all the information into an Excel template, or type the 1099s, which I hope nobody's doing any typing, but that's always possible. But I want to show you how to run a report that will get you the information you need. So it's going to give you your vendor name, the vendor address, their tax ID number. This will just tell you what class that you've got things booked to. You don't have to use that if you don't want. And then this is the amount that things have been paid. So this would be what I've done is set up a VAX and AG TMD cost share for 1099Gs. And this report, when I run it, I would compare it to the report that you get out of tracking. So typically we would run all the 1099s out of tracking on plain paper, not on the 1099 forms themselves, just run them on plain paper. And then I would run this report out of QuickBooks, and I'm going to show you how to set this report up. So you'd run this report out of QuickBooks, and then you would just, based on the names, go through and verify that the 1099s that came out of tracking matches to this here. You'd be surprised how many, a couple of different districts that, they didn't match for some reason or other. Now, sometimes it won't match because we've got $400 here and the 1099 won't even print out because it's less than the $600. But those are the kinds of things that you should go through and check. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you how to do this out of QuickBooks. So we're going to start with the transaction list by vendor. So if you're in QuickBooks, and I've already got this report memorized. So if I go over here and look at my Adams and Company reports, I've got this 1099G report already memorized. And then I've got a potential 1099s miscellaneous that's also covers the NEC here. But I'm going to do these by scratch so that you can see how to do it. So if you go to reports and you go to vendors and go down to transaction list by vendor, click there. That's going to create a report. And then I've given you the steps here to go through. So you're going to go through and make sure that you've added the columns that you need to add. So when you go to customize this report, click on customize. Pull this down. Hang on just a second. Let's see if I can. My screen is flipping off. So let me see if I can get it on there. Here we go. Doesn't want to move. Excuse me. All right. I'm still in the upper left hand. There it goes. Okay, so we're going to go in and tell it that we want to look at specific columns. This is your column selection. So this is on your display tab for those of you that are kind of new to QuickBooks. So we're going to go down through here and I'm going to select the name address and I'm going to select the name and I'm going to go ahead and select source name. I'll tell you why here in a minute. And we may go back and exclude one or the other, but I want to show you what this does. And then we're going to go down here and tell it that we want to look at the tax ID number. And we want to look at, I'm going to take the split off because I don't care really what bank account it was paid out of. I'm going to pull both the debits and credits. And I think that's it. So let me see here. It didn't give me balance. No, that's not what I want. Okay. All right, so this is, and I'm gonna look at this for last year. All right, so what it's done is it's, oh, and I need to do some more filtering. So I've got everything here. And if you'll look, because I've not filtered stuff, I've got kind of duplicate. So this is a bunch of duplicate payments because it's picking up both the checking account and the accounts payable account. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to filter it again. And I'm going to filter it choosing multiple accounts, including just the cost share accounts. So I'm going to tell it instead of all accounts, I'm going to do multiple accounts. And then my cost share accounts are at the very bottom. Now, some of you all may be doing this differently, but we've moved I'm using a test company, but I wanted to show you kind of what we've done in the past. So I've moved all of our cost share stuff to the bottom as other income and expense so that we don't have our income and expenses for cost share mixed up in the other budgeted items. So I'm going to do cost share expenses. I'm going to just go ahead and these are all the ones that I'm going to do as 1099-Gs. I'm going to leave SARP alone and click OK. And something happened. What did I do here? Well, let's see what I've done here. Oh, let me get rid of some of this. I want all. I didn't put that in your notes. So that might be something. Let me cancel. You might want to make a note. When this gets created, it automatically defaults the detail level to summary. So we're going to say all. And there it goes. Okay, so just make a note. I forgot to put that down here. So just make sure that you change that to all. So this is every payment made for these vendors for the year. Okay, so your job now is to go through and look at each one of them. So is this vendor, this is Department of this is DCR. So this is a payment to DCR. So you're not required to do anything there. But most of these others, unless they're over the $600 mark or under the $600 mark, most of these others are going to be required. And even the ones that are under the $600 mark, there's a question as to whether you should be sending them a 1099 because this is all the 1099-Gs. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and change it by my header to reflect that this is for 1099-Gs. Okay. And once you have a report like this, then just click on memorize. And it's going to say 1099-Gs. And you can memorize that and save it in any group that you've got. If you've got a group, you don't have to save it in a group. And just click on OK. So once you've memorized this, you've got it to use for future use. And this, again, this just gives you the information that you need to file the 1099. Now, I told you a minute ago, I've picked up name and source name. For you all, it should be the same, but if you end up using this customer job for any reason, this is going to end up being the name, and then this is the source name. So I've seen some people that use customer job, and so if that's the case, you might get some conflicting information. So you might want to run it both ways and then exclude the one that you don't need. Does that make sense? So this is going to give you your name, and I've just got these as vendor 104, but that's typically it's going to have the whatever name you put into that vendor file, their address. This is some information about it so that you can kind of look at it and see if it's something that you recognize or ever how it works in tracking. This is the ID number that we've got in QuickBooks, and then the amount that was paid. Okay. And all this should match tracking. And if it matches tracking and you want to print them straight out of tracking, then just print it straight out of tracking. This is really just a verification tool. If you decide you don't want to do that and don't want to mail them, then you can go in and retype all this information to your online e-file system. And we've done that for some districts as well. Like I said, sometimes it's easier to do that than try to print forms, buy 1099s, pay for postage, go through the process of printing things and they don't print right and all that. So there's some pros and cons to doing it both ways. So that's the 1099-G process. Okay, so that's what I've given you here. And then again, the only other thing I would say is make a note out there that you need to change that one indicator so that it goes to the detail. And this is what you should end up seeing. All right, questions on that? And I know I ran through that really quick, but again, you're going to customize it. You're going to select which columns you want to see. And if you want to see certain columns, you know, you can type here and find things just as long as it's checked. And then you're going to change your filters to where you're looking at multiple accounts and you're only looking at your cost share accounts. Again, mine are all at the bottom. Some of you may have cost share payment accounts up here somewhere, you know, in this area. You might have cost share payment accounts there. So select which accounts are cost share that are 1099-G. And then fix your indicator that was here that had the detail. Actually, once you click on detail, it goes away. So that's not there anymore. That's all there is to that. And just make sure you memorize it and then you have it for future use. Now on the 1099 miscellaneous, it's basically the same scenario. We're just going to look at different accounts. So you're going to have the transaction list by vendor again. You're going to go through and select all of the same items. Okay. There's no difference. You're going to select all the same items. So I'm just going to kill this. So we'll go back to this. So we're going to go to reports, vendors, transaction list by vendor. We're going to look at last. If you do last year, it's going to do your fiscal year. Okay. So I'm going to do the calendar year. I'm going to do 20 since I've got enough data in 20 to give me what we need. Okay, so then we're going to go in and tell it that we need to look at other specific information, address. We're going to look at the tax ID number. We've already got debits and credits, so that's good. All right, we're going to take away the split. So as you remember from previous classes, if you want to get rid of a column, you grab the column to the right on that little dot, 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 and then slide it to the left and it gets rid of it. Okay. And I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of the source name since we've got name. And you can get rid of other stuff if you don't think it's important, but sometimes it's nice to have that information just for verification if you need to go look at something. All right, so we're going to go back and we're going to tell it that we're going to look at specific accounts, because right now it's looking at all accounts, and we want to just look at, we're going to pick for this one, we're going to pick all ordinary income and expense accounts. Now, if you've got the, let me go back here and change my level here too. So if you've got your ag cost share accounts in the expense section up here, you know, in the expenses, whereas I've got mine down here in the cost share, in the other expense, other income and expense, I've got all the cost share down here. If you've got them up here, then when you run this report and you tell it to do it by all operating expenses, it's going to pull your cost share stuff again. But that's no problem. This is just a report, just ignore it. Or if you wanted to, you can go back and say, rather than all ordinary income and expense, you can go back and say multiple accounts, and then go down through here and find your first expense account that's related. So you can just say, let's just say this is our first expense. And we're just going to go down through here and say, select all. And then we're going to go back and unselect the ones that are cost share. So let's just say that was cost share. And we're going to also, at the same time, unselect anything that's payroll related, because we don't need payroll related stuff for this report, but I would leave everything else checked. So you're going to get a lot of things here that you probably won't have to send a 1099 to, but it's also important to look just to make sure whether or not there's a 1099. I'm going to fix mine because I selected all the ones at the bottom too. Sorry. Get rid of these. This is all the cost share stuff for me. Okay. So, and you can see which account it was to. So you can, like, this account would have been for accounting services. You know, here's meals. You typically wouldn't send one to this vendor for meals, but if it was a catering company for meals, you would. So it's just a process of going through and making a decision on each one. Now, one of the reasons I don't like the QuickBooks 1099 function is because it pretty much creates a 1099 when you've indicated that it's a 1099, but if you've forgotten when you set that person up that you've forgotten to include them as a 1099 vendor, or maybe at the time you didn't think that they would be a 1099 vendor because you didn't expect to pay them more than $600. Then when you go to run that 1099 report, it may not include everything that you're required to report on. So I just think this report is a better report to think about, you know, just going through. And again, there's a lot of stuff here that you would never do it, but like office lease, you know, you would typically send, you know, if it's a person, you would have to send them a 1099. If it's a corporation, then you don't have to worry about it. So those are the kinds of things. And I usually just print this out and start making notes or highlight and just figure out what's what. So in this case, I would typically say this is potential 1099s. You know, this is not your 1099s, but it's potential ones. And then I would save it, memorize it, and have it for next year. And that should pick up everything. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if you have told it multiple accounts here and you've gone through and selected the accounts, if next year you add a new account and you've got, you know, you've paid someone catering and you've got a new account that's called catering, but your report that you memorized doesn't pick that up because it's a new account and that's going to be unchecked as a catering, you need to make sure that you do kind of review your different setups just to make sure that you've not excluded something accidentally that you should have included. Okay. So again, you're looking for anything over $5.99, and I've got in here any attorneys for any amount, but that's not really true. It's attorneys for any corporation or non-incorporation, but it's still a $5.99 threshold. So I'm sorry, strike that comment for any amount. Okay. Questions. We've got a couple questions here. The IRS site states payments of 600 or more for 1099-Gs. Okay, Kathleen, if you found that reference and want to share that, that would be great. Did not find that reference, and I looked specifically for that, but I'm glad you did. And I did find that 1099-G 600 for box 6, but not box 7. For nutrient management plan rider payments, are we using the 1099 miscellaneous box 3? No. If it's a plan rider and you're paying that to someone, you would use the 1099 NEC. So hopefully I put that in the table correctly. Let's go back and look, because I don't want that to be confusing if it's not, but I thought I did. I don't think I addressed the actual specifically the rider. So that would be like a grant writer. If you had someone down here, that would be like an impact study or a grant writer. You would
So
do
let
it
me-
as an NEC.
Let me ask this, Sarah, the nutrient management plan writers that we're paying, it's where a producer has assigned payment for their cost share practice to the nutrient management planner. So I think right now, and I'd have to double check, that the tracking program is actually printing all of that to a 1099 miscellaneous, as we have done for years, but that of course was before the 1099 NEC existed.
Right.
Do we need to make that update to print to a 1099 NEC?
Yes.
Or does it stay as a 1099 miscellaneous, since this is like the contract is in the producer's name, but the payment has been sent to the nutrient management plan writer?
If the payment itself was sent to the nutrient management plan writer and that person performed services,
He's
in
considered a
relationship,
contractor
yeah, he would be an NEC.
Okay. I was just curious because he's not a contractor for the district necessarily. He's like a contractor for the producer at that point. I didn't know if that made like a difference or not. So I need to
Yeah.
double check in the tracking program how that's printing out then.
Right. Yeah, the only other way you could report it would be to report the full amount on the 1099-G as a cost share payment, and then to have the farmer themselves do a 1099 NEC to the
Okay.
plan
Yeah, and
writer.
we're certainly not going to put that on the farmer. So
Right.
I will double check tracking to make sure that that's coming out right.
Right. Okay. Sarah Kravitz did not receive my handout. Can you resend that?
I just emailed it to her.
Okay, great. And then Kathleen says she did find that on irs.gov. So I'll verify that, Kathleen. Thank you. That was my source, but obviously that wasn't something I saw. And that is similar to assigning payments of septic to contractors. Yes, Deanna, if you're assigning payments to contractors, it should be going on the NEC form. And I know that is an issue because the tracking program, I'm sure, has not been updated at all for the new NEC. All right. Any other questions on the setting up a report within QuickBooks? Hopefully that made some sense. And again, I just highly encourage you to, and I don't know if the tracking will ever get to this point to where you can e-file from tracking, but I really encourage using the e-file 1099s. Just again, because the IRS is in such an uproar right now about processing anything that's coming in the mail. All right, my last topic, and this is just kind of an aside that has nothing to do with 1099s, but I was supposed to cover some financial related things too. I am on a task force and have been for about 6 years with the Virginia Department of Taxation. And I've not found this to be true in our district, but several CPAs that are on the task force that are across the state have expressed that they are having issues with their farmers not receiving, well, not the farmers per se, but the state, I think, not receiving information on the BMP credits. And Department of Taxes tried to research this from their end to try to figure out what's going on. And I think, and I talked to Blair about this a little bit, and I think you all did some training in August. And probably many of you that are on probably don't take care of the BMP credits or take care of getting those credit forms to the state. But if someone qualifies for a BMP credit, again, when they file their tax return and they state on their tax return that they're due that BMP credit by way of reporting it on 760, when their tax return gets e-filed, which most everybody these days are e-filing their returns. So when it gets e-filed, it automatically gets bumped up. When Virginia gets it, it gets bumped up against another database that Virginia keeps of all the BMP credits that they show are eligible credits. So if your district has not sent in to Virginia Department of Tax all of the credit forms, and I honestly couldn't tell you exactly what's required, but I know what the farmers get, and I'm assuming that's the same thing that goes to the state to show that those credits are allowed. But if Virginia doesn't have those on their database, then it automatically spits out an automated notice. And I'm sure you all don't like getting tax notices, and I'm sure you don't like for your recipients to get tax notices, because the first thing they're going to do is come back to you and say, or the first thing they're going to do is go back to their CPA and say, I got this notice and I can't figure out why, because I gave you all the information you need to file it. And if I'm a CPA preparing the return, I'll say, well, yes, we filed it that way. We sent in the BMP credit form. We have to attach that as a PDF to their tax return. We send that in with the return. But what happens when Virginia gets it, they don't even look at that PDF. The very first thing it does is it bumps against the tax against their database for the BMP credits. So that's the first thing it does. And if it doesn't match, then it automatically spits out this notice. So then we as CPAs are having to go and pull out all the information, write a letter to Virginia, include the BMP credit information, sometimes get more information from you guys, Soil and Water, to verify that they were actually due that credit, send all that information in, and then finally they allow it. But by the time we do that, that's at a minimum for me would be 45 minutes, and then if I'm charging my client based on an hourly rate or some other rate, that's more money that they're having to spit out. And it's typically only because those BMP credits haven't gotten onto Virginia's database. Typically, you all should be sending those in no later than January 31st. If you've got them earlier, that's better. Go ahead and send them in, because the sooner they get on Virginia's database, the sooner people can file their 1040s with their Schedule Fs and not have any problems with these credits showing up on their Virginia return. So if you can do that, and I just promised this task force, I said, I'm doing this training in November. I will bring this to everybody's attention. Again, you all may not be the ones that send those in. It might be a conservationist that does that, or whoever's working directly with the farmers. But I just wanted to make it very clear to you all that that was something that you needed to be doing. And I don't, and somebody's got to hear, I believe DCR was notifying the Department of Tax. If you all are putting those tax credits into a program that DCR has and DCR is sending all that, that's great. But I don't know, I don't even know if DCR has all that information. I'm not sure about the process from your all's end because I've not been involved, but I did promise the other CPAs in our task force that I would bring this up so that someone can kind of verify that that process is happening this tax season. And again, the sooner you can get those credit forms into Virginia Department of Tax, the better. I know the farmers are getting them. We're seeing those from the CPA perspective when we do their tax return. The farmers are getting them. But that, just like we do the 1099s, the 1099 goes to the recipient and the 1099 goes to the IRS. The same thing has to happen with the credits. The credit form has to go to the recipient and the credit form has to go to Virginia Department of Tax. So I'm gonna ask Blair, can you weigh in on that? She's dropped off the call. So with that in mind, I'm gonna address a couple people's questions. Sharon says, after having participated in the tax credit training, I seriously doubt we will receive any more requests for tax credit. It has become very complicated, and I do not think farmers will mess with it anymore. Well, that's all well and good, but Clinch Valley just sent one in yesterday. So I don't know if that'll be true across the state. Maybe it will be in your district. And then Terry says, I believe DCR is notifying the Department of Tax. According to the last training, it's now the participant's responsibility to file. Well, that's not true. The participant does file. The participant does get their credit, and they do file that on their tax return. But again, it's just like the 1099 matching. That same credit has to go to the Virginia Department of Taxation to be put on their database, just like a 1099, so that it matches. Now that's purely from Virginia Department of Tax. And we've had this discussion multiple times in our task force, but that's what's supposed to happen. Mark, DCR gleans tax credit data from tracking in mid to late January and shares this list with Department of Tax. If that's true, that's great.
Yes, and tax actually does double check like what a producer sends in against the information that DCR submits.
And that's what I'm saying is that's where there's some kind of a misconnect or disconnect or a delay, because CPAs across the state are saying that they're getting these notices because Virginia says they don't have that credit on their database from DCR saying it's there. And then when the farmer files their tax return and has that credit on their tax return and it automatically bumps up against Virginia Tax's database, there's no match. And so it's getting kicked back. But if you all are working with tax and have been maybe in the last couple of months and worked all those kinks out, that's great. But like I said, I just promised Virginia Tax I would bring it to your all's attention. Okay. COVID-related sick pay and family leave credits. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because I've seen a couple districts do this when they probably shouldn't have. So under the COVID legislation that took place in 2020, and then again, the ARP that took place in March 2021, employers are allowed to take a sick leave credit or a family leave credit if they have to pay employees for taking time off due to COVID. So the credit comes back to them either as a reduction in their 941 tax payments, or they get the credit back when they file their 941. Or if they've got more credit than they can take on their 941, then they have to file a 720 to get it back. I have heard that there were some districts and that there were some Virginia governmental agencies that actually filed for this credit. But in the legislation, it specifically says that governmental agencies are precluded from taking the credit. That doesn't mean they don't pay their employees for being out for COVID, but they can't take the credit and get that money back from the government. So I don't know if that's been the case. I just wanted to alert you all since you're all on the call today. But if you have in 2020 or 2021 taken any of those credits and reduced your 941 tax liability or gotten refunds back on your 941s, that probably should be amended and those payments repaid back to the IRS. Any comments on that? Anybody? And that is really, if you did that, don't be embarrassed, because that little blurb was not made really clear initially. And I think it wasn't until much later that people discovered that they shouldn't have been taking those credits. But you all are governmental, you are considered a governmental agency of the state of Virginia, so you should not be taking those credits. And that concludes what I have prepared for today. And so I have time, about 20 minutes, to pretty much answer anything that you all want to take care of. Amy says that governmental employers were eligible for credits from April 1 to September 30th. Well, Amy, I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm not sure that I saw that, but if that's the case, and I know Amy is very meticulous, so she probably did research that. I have not run across that for this year, but if that's the case, then yay. But it was not the case for 2020. All right, any other questions that I can help with? And it doesn't have to be related to 1099s. It can be anything that's QuickBooks related or tax related. And I can, if it's something I don't know, I don't mind to research it for you. We've got about 15 minutes if you want to throw some questions out. You all have been very, very, very good to throw questions out. Well, if not, we are going to finish up. I'll be glad to stay on for the next 15 minutes. If some of you want to drop off and finish the rest of your afternoon and without listening to me, that's great. If you want to stay on and ask more questions, I'll be glad. I don't mind if you unmute and ask questions. Just be careful about your background noise so that we're not getting any kind of feedback. And I'm here. So thank you guys. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate everybody's attention. Again, I appreciate your questions. I hope this information was a good resource for you. Again, keep those books, print them out and keep them in your file and refer back to them. Just keep in mind that tax laws change all the time. So if there's something that you need help with, I'm available. I do help about, I don't know, 10, 12 districts pretty regularly on things. I can remote into your computer anytime you need me to. I help with attachment E's and QuickBooks issues and VRS issues and payroll issues. So anytime you need any assistance, let me know. I think most of you that I do help have found it to be beneficial. So feel free to give me a call if you need anything. And again, I'll just sit here quietly for the next 15 minutes and you all can chime in if you need anything.
Sarah, thank you so much for everything. We definitely all learned something in this training. So that is very much appreciated. And I think this is something that, we can kind of continue to do on like a cyclical, on some sort of cycle every couple of years as we have staff changes and tax law changes and all kinds of things. This is always useful. So really appreciate you taking the time to put all this together and spending some time with us this afternoon. For everyone who's still on the call, like Sarah offered, she'll stick around for a little bit longer to answer any questions. So feel free just to speak up and ask those questions. And again, Sarah, I just can't thank you enough for putting all this incredibly useful training together.
Well, you're welcome. My pleasure. I saw
Sarah.
Kathleen has her hand up.
Hand up. Yes, I'm on here
Yay.
now.
Okay.
So, VCAP. VCAP, I know all districts, they don't do VCAP, but we actually had more 1099s for VCAP than I had for 1099Gs last year. So the problem that has been arising with my VCAP, when they fill out the W-9, and I think you kind of touched on that. So they may list, a husband's name and then the wife's name, last name, and then they have a social security number. So it's like, well, who am I issuing the 1099? And usually I'll just, send them an email and say, hey, I need to know whose social security number that I'm going to use on this W-9 when I issue my 1099. So that's been kind of an issue. And the IRS, I've received several notices for this year that my VCAP participants, their social security numbers are not matching their names. And so it was kind of like, we can't hold with any kind of withholding for them not doing that, because they're only getting a payment once, is probably once in a lifetime.
Right. Yeah. And that's fine. If you don't send them anything else for the rest of the eons, you don't have to withhold. So that's not a huge issue. But
Okay.
if you just keep in mind, if they do have a husband and a wife and you get one social security number, it probably is best to determine whose social security number that is. Typically, they're probably going to put the husband's social security number, and you would do the 1099 to the husband. But I know a lot of people, they see their farm as a joint farm, or whatever they're doing, it's a joint. And so they'll put both the husband and the wife on there. But usually it's better just to send the 1099 to, I definitely would not put both the husband and the wife on the 1099. I would just put
On it. That makes sense, because the VCAP is most homeowners, kind of in urban areas for us, Virginia Beach, Chesapeake. And so that was just a little bit of the issues. And we do have an independent contractor that we use for our VCAP program, and he is totally independent. We don't provide anything for him. And last year, I think, was the first year that I reported the NEC for him. So I don't know if that's when the changes came about for him for his 1099.
Well, definitely the NEC was new last year. If you'd been using him for a number of years, you probably should have been reporting it on a 1099 miscellaneous.
Yes, that's what he was. Yes, he was getting a 1099 miscellaneous.
Okay, probably about 7. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's good seeing you again.
You're welcome. Good seeing you.
Thank
Good
you.
seeing you.
Right.
If anybody else has anything, feel free to chime in. Like I said, I'll be here till 4, and then I will log off. I have to sit here and look at my pretty face.
Hey, Sarah, I don't know if you have any, this is Sheila, sorry,
Uh-huh.
because my computer's not working right as usual. I just have a quick question though, and I don't know if you have any information about this, but I keep seeing that QuickBooks is trying to guide everybody to online services.
Okay.
And do you think they're gonna discontinue desktop, or, I mean, I
No.
know you don't know. Okay.
That
good,
I
'cause I'm
no,
like, I'm
for,
not going to online because that,
Yeah.
I'm not doing that, but
they're not.
yeah, online.
There are no plans right now for them to discontinue desktop. In fact, the
Okay.
QuickBooks 2022 version that just came out is has a lot of programming into it. So they've already put in a lot of resources to revise that. However, they are increasing rates. So
Yeah,
if you have, and I don't think I could tell you this exactly because I don't have the information in front of me, but if you are on an older version of QuickBooks, let's say you're on let's see right now, let's say 2019, I think is still working, which will be sunsetted in May.
yeah.
If you're on the older version, you have the option right now to go ahead and upgrade to the 2022. And I hope I'm telling you this right. I don't have it in front of me, but you have the option to upgrade to the 2022, which the 2022 will be a good version for 3 years. If you don't upgrade to the 2022 now, starting January 1, somewhere thereabouts, they're going to force you to go to their subscription service. And the subscription service is going to require you to pay, have an automatic payment every year for the new version. And they will send you that new version every year by way of electronic. It'll pop up and say, you're now available. The new version is now available. Go ahead and update. So you will always be on the most current version. So their model right now is to get everybody on the subscription-based version. And that way they only have to maintain that particular version. Right now they're maintaining 3 years worth of versions. And that's hurting their resources apparently. So they're wanting everybody to do this subscription-based. So that's the only, as far as the desktop goes, they've got plans to continue on with that. There are a lot of people using desktop, and if anybody's on here considering going to online, I would not. If you've ever used online, you will hate it. Now, if you've never used desktop and you've only used online, then you don't know the difference. Then you probably don't have an opinion. But my husband has been trying to get me to convert all of our clients to online for a long time. And this year I made him do tax returns for clients who were online, and now he hates it. So unless you've used it, you just don't understand the differences. But so Terry says, have you heard any pros or cons for the subscription service? It is a little expensive. It's going to run somewhere between $199 to $299 a year. So that's what typically a new version is going to cost you if you did do it every year. So it's not cost prohibitive, but you can no longer just stay on one version for 3 years and save that $199 or $299 for the other 2 years. And of course, if you're on payroll, you do have to pay for the additional payroll service. So you have to do that annually anyway. So that's not an additional cost.
Well, somebody else asked me about it, and I'm like, I don't think they're going to discontinue desktop, but I have told other districts I don't renew my Intuit through QuickBooks through Intuit. I don't, because it's really expensive. I just get a new version every year of QuickBooks with enhanced payroll, and it costs me less than just doing an enhanced payroll subscription through Intuit.
Yeah, and that's true. Intuit is a little more expensive. So yeah, that's true. If you go to Office Max or Office Depot, whatever they are now, and buy it off the shelf, it's a little less expensive. So be careful though about buying them online. There are some people out there that have pirated copies online, and sometimes they don't work. So just be careful about that.
I don't ever do that. Like, I'm buying mine from Office Max, or actually Office Depot and Staples. That's the only two people.
Yeah. Terry says, who are you getting it from? You're talking about the Yeah, the
Yeah,
Staples or
the
Office Depot.
outside of Intuit. I would never do that. I did do it through Amazon once because it was like $100 cheaper and I didn't have any issues with that, but
Yeah, usually on Amazon, if you look at the buyer rate or the seller
Yep.
ratings and other
Seller,
comments, you
yep,
can
yep,
kind of vet it out that way.
but I think it's safest, like you said, to do Staples or Office Depot because I think they would offer you any type of customer service or refunds if something would happen.
Yeah. Now with the new subscription base, they're kind of pushing all those people out the door. I mean, they're probably not going to offer that too much off the shelf. I mean, they might offer
Really?
off the shelf for the first person, but once you're on this subscription base, you're kind of tied into it, and that's part of their model. So back to your question, they're not going to get rid of desktop, but they're going to do some things to make it a little more profitable for them to keep desktop around. Sarah, do you recommend updating to 2022? I have 2019. I would recommend it, Kathleen. If you'll email me, maybe on the side, I will send you some information as far as the deadline that you have to do that by and the potential costs. But you might consider doing that because if you get the 2022, I think you'll be okay for 3 years before you have to go on this subscription based. And you're getting ready to having to do it anyway because they're going to sunset 2019 this May. Terry, can you send it to me too? If you'll send me your email, Terry, I won't remember based on comments here, but if you all will send me an email, and I think my email's on the training materials. So if you'll send that, I will get back to you all. I see several of you are still on. I'm guessing that you're just thinking I might give some really good tidbits of information, which is fine. I'll be glad to do, but anybody else have a specific question? Feel free to chime in, unmute yourself, or you can chat. Hopefully everyone got the training materials. You're welcome to everybody that said thank you. I've enjoyed it. Hopefully it was informative. Well, we're getting down to a couple of minutes, so we've only got about
Sarah,
6 people on.
This is Sheila. So do you have any good tips for customer service, how to get around them?
With the IRS?
No, with Intuit, QuickBooks.
Oh.
Goodness,
Yeah.
girl. I was on the phone the other day and I was on the phone all day because what happened is Jim bought a QuickBooks also. And he put our name on it, and I already have like our business. Oh my God, my stupid dog. I already have it, our name. Oh my, I'm going to go inside because, and so what happened is when he registered our business with his QuickBooks, it canceled mine out.
Oh, yeah. That's one thing.
Nightmare.
Yeah, and customer service for you guys probably is pretty bad. Now, like for us with Pro Advisors,
Terrible.
we have a special number and all of our people are American-based people. You all are probably talking to foreigners, unfortunately, but I think eventually they're going to try to go back to all American-based support, but I'm not sure how long it'll take for that to happen.
Yeah.
But if you do need a multi-user QuickBooks, and I wish Jim had asked me about it before, but you can get just the multi-user add-on, which is typically $199. With your all's version of QuickBooks, you can have 5 users. So if you get a
Yeah.
multi-user add-on, you can do that straight through QuickBooks and then download it from Intuit for $199.
Mhm.
And it automatically connects to your particular account.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that from now on because I'm gonna tell you what. Oh, I thought I was gonna I was on the phone and that girl I was talking to, all I heard was kids screaming in the background for 4 hours, and she never did solve the problem. And then at 8 o'clock at night, I was like, okay, now I know what to do because you've walked me through the steps 10 times. Okay, but yeah, okay. So I'll remember that because I told him, I said, don't do that again.
Yeah. So yeah,
Because
those that multi-user version's out there for 5 people. So
Okay, cool. And so now you're telling me I need to become a QuickBooks advisor to get better customer service.
well, if you do that, then you have to have 40 hours of continuing education every year. So
Oh, that's not too hard though. I don't. But anyway, I'm just thought I'd fill in some time to ask you a question. But okay,
yeah.
if anybody else has, I will let you.
All right, guys. Well, it has been fun. I've appreciated your attention. Thank you all for the last couple that are still on. And I am getting ready to sign off. Blair, any last words? She may just be on.
Sarah, this is Shannon. I would like to say thank you very much. This has been very informative. I appreciate it so much. I'm really glad a lot of people had questions and there was a lot of feedback. And I may be contacting you, so.
Okay, that's fine. Give me a call. All right, guys, I'm signing off. You all have a great rest of your week, and hopefully I will see
Thank
you in the next. You're welcome.